Well, thank you very much. Hello, Saddleback Church, and all of you streaming in the 14 locations around the world. It's a joy to be with you today. I'm guessing some of you are pretty good on technology, and some of you have been resentful since the day the world went digital. I'm somewhere in the middle, but recently I had trouble with my internet access, so I called up one of those nice folks in India who answer questions all day about how computers work. He helped me with my problem. I was about to hang up and I thought, you know what? This guy's job is to answer questions about how computers work. I bet you he gets some pretty stupid questions. Now, I'm guessing you've been told by a teacher at some point in your life there's no such thing as a stupid question. Let me just tell you, that's a lie. I said, can you tell me the craziest questions you've ever received from somebody about how to work a computer? He said, sure. He said, I had a lady call up, she was really frustrated, she was upset. He said, well, ma'am, what's the matter? She said, my foot pedal doesn't work. You know when you sew, you use a foot pedal? She thought the mouse went under the desk and was like a foot pedal. He said, I had a guy call up, same thing, a little bit confused, upset, frustrated, kind of calmed him down. What's the matter? He said, what's the matter? He said, well, my cup holder is not big enough to fit my favorite mug. He thought the DVD-ROM drive that went out was supposed to be a cup holder. Then this last one happened to someone very dear to me. I can't tell you who it is because I would never want to embarrass the woman who birthed me. So my mom has come a long ways technologically speaking. She follows me on Twitter now. She's on Instagram. But for a while, anything technology just kind of freaked her out. Well, she got a new computer, decided to set up her own email account. One of the first instructions that came up on the screen said, close all the windows. My mom got up from her chair, walked around the house, and closed all the physical windows in the house. Now you're chuckling because you obviously get the joke. You know that a DVD drive is not meant to hold a mug. You know, a mouse, if you still use one, is not meant to be a foot pedal. And when the computer screen says close all the windows, it doesn't mean the physical windows in your house. You see, a computer's been designed by somebody very smart to function a certain way. And when we don't know why it was designed, when we don't know its function and use it for something else, what happens? Confusion, frustration, and we get upset. But what happens when we actually know the truth and we know the design of a computer and we can use it accordingly? What happens? Then we're set free, right? You see, true freedom is living according to God's design for your life. That's what true freedom is. True freedom is living according to God's design for your life. Now, I teach at a school called Capistrano Valley Christian Schools in San Juan Capistrano. It's actually my 13th year there. I teach part-time. I'm full-time at Biola. And I would ask my students frequently, I still do, I'd say, how would you define freedom? You know the number one response I get from students is freedom is doing whatever you want to do. Friends, that's not freedom. True freedom is living according to God's design for our life. So think about it. Have you ever noticed the first attribute we're told about God in the Bible? In the beginning, God created. We're told God is a creator before we're told that God is love, before he's just, before he's holy, before he's merciful. Why? Because if something is created, it has a purpose. A computer's created, it has a purpose and a particular function. We learned at the beginning of Genesis that God is a creator. There's a purpose for work. There's a purpose for family. There's a purpose for sex. There's a purpose for marriage. And it's only when we know that truth and live according to it that we're actually set free. That's why if we want to know how we should live and why we are here, we need to know where we came from. If we want to know how we should live and why we're here, we need to know where we came from. I'm honored to kick off your series looking at the big questions, and we're beginning at the obvious place. Where did we come from? Well, here's the big question that's going to frame this entire series, and it's really this. Are we accidental byproducts of blind forces in nature? Are you a cosmic accident? Or are we the pinnacle of creation intended by a personal and a loving God? Are you an accident and hence get to define truth? Or is there a creator and we're only free when we live according to his design for the world? Now, every belief system kind of answers this question. In fact, every worldview answers three big questions. And the first one is origin. How did we get here? Why are we here? Where did we come from? Every single belief system starts with the question of origin. Why am I here? But then second, it has what we'll call the predicament. What went wrong? What went wrong? What's messed up in the world? And then third, the resolution. How do we fix it? That's it. How did we get here? What went wrong? How do we fix it? Every worldview or religion or belief system answers these three questions. So take Buddhism, for example. Buddhism says we've eternally been here, kind of going through some kind of cycle of reincarnation. What went wrong is we suffer. And the reason we suffer is because we have desires. So the solution is follow the eightfold path and get rid of our desires. Or what's taught in the largest church in America, the Church of Oprah. Sorry, Saddleback, you thought it was you. She teaches theology, New Age theology. The origin story, we've eternally been part of the God consciousness. The problem, we forgot that we're God. The solution, be reminded that we are God. Or take secular humanism, this atheistic evolutionary story. The problem with the world is religion, so the solution is to get rid of people like you and to get rid of people like me. That's the secular humanist story. In fact, every movie does this too. Have you noticed Act 1 in a movie is the origin, Act 2 is the problem, Act 3, they try to fix it. Every movie does, right? Take like the recent Jurassic World. Right? If you haven't seen it by now, there is a plot spoiler, but it really shouldn't spoil anything. But I just want to let you know, the dinosaurs get out of the cage. If you didn't see that coming, I'm not sure if I could do anything to help you out. But the origin story is what? Here's the students, here's the dinosaurs, here's the family. And then the problem is the dinosaurs get out. The solution, got to save the people and stop the dinosaurs. Even commercials do this. Have you ever noticed how commercials tell a story? Right, you see a family, mom and a dad, and you see two kids riding down the road in a small SUV or in a minivan. That's the introduction, all-American family. Problem is a boulder starts rolling down from the side of the hill, headed towards them. Solution, fortunately, they got the right tires. Right? Religions and movies and commercials tell a story. Christianity is a story about the world. And it looks like this, and you know the story. The origin is in the beginning, God created. That's the origin account. The problem is sin, we rebelled from God, and the resolution is what? Okay, I can't hear you all streaming in, but live I heard like 2 people give the right answer. Let me tell you something, if you don't know the answer to a question in church, just say Jesus. In fact, my daughter's backstage, my family's with me, and she's in 3rd grade, but when she was in kindergarten, that's when they first learn how to raise their hand and not blurt out answers, and the teacher calls on them. So her teacher said, class, raise your hand, I'll call on you. I'll start with an easy question. What's gray, has a big bushy tail, and climbs in trees? And none of these 5-year-olds raise their hands. She thought, this is strange. Class, raise your hand, I'll call on you. What's gray, has a big bushy tail, and climbs in trees? Nothing. She said, class, raise your hand, I'll call on you. What's gray, has a big bushy tail, and climbs in trees? Finally, my daughter Shauna's classmate, little Johnny, raised his hand. She said, yes, Johnny. He said, I'll say Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me. You know the Christian story. God created us, we rebelled through sin, and we were brought into eternal life through the person of Jesus. Now, the naturalistic Darwinian story is very different than this. According to one influential new atheist, he said, quote, Darwinism implies that humanity developed by accident. That's the origin account. You're not made in the image of God. You're not planned. You're a cosmic accident. That's the origin account. What's the problem? The problem with the world is not sin. The problem of the world is that evolution is a clumsy process and things get hurt in the middle of it. And the solution is what? It's not God who's gonna solve our problems. We must solve our own problems, typically through science. Now, Darwin himself was aware that if you bought his origin story, what followed from it? In fact, he wrote in his autobiography, he said, "The view now held by most physicists is that the sun with all the planets will in time grow too cold for life, unless indeed some great body dashes into the sun and thus gives it fresh life. Believing as I do that man in the distant future will be a far more perfect creature than he is now." Notice he doesn't mention women. They're already perfect and men are just trying to catch up. At least we could own up to it. He says, "It is an intolerable thought that he and all other sentient beings are doomed to complete annihilation after such a long, continued, slow progress." What a depressing worldview. Darwin realized that where we come from and our origin story shapes everything how we should live and where we're going. Now, the fact that there not being a God results in an unpleasant reality doesn't mean that it's false. That doesn't follow. The question is, what's true? Now, I wrote a book called Understanding Intelligent Design, where I delve into a bunch of the scientific evidence pointing towards the evidence for a designer. I wrote with a friend of mine, Dr. William Dembski, who has 2 PhDs. By the way, you know what you call someone with 2 PhDs, right? Paradox. I thought it was good. Well, in writing this book, one thing my dad always taught me was to read both sides of every issue, whether it's political, whether it's history, theology. I would read both sides, and something surprised me is how many Darwinists or atheists that I would read on this issue, although they don't think the world was designed, will admit that the world looks as if it were designed. So the most famous atheist in the world, Richard Dawkins, wrote this. He said, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose." Now, if something runs like a dog, eats like a dog, smells like a dog, swims like a dog, what do you think it is? And don't say Jesus. I made that mistake sharing that story with junior hires. He goes, "Jesus." I was like, oops, bad example. Maybe it runs, smells, eats, etc. like a dog because it is a dog. Maybe the world looks designed to believers and non-believers because it's actually designed. Now we're gonna take a look at a couple examples, but the design we see in the natural world should not surprise us. Why? Because 3,000 years ago, look at what David wrote in the Psalms. He said, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hand. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge." The natural world reveals truths about the Creator. So let's take a look at a couple examples. And we'll start in the book, Understanding Intelligent Design. Dr. Dembski and I go through about 5 or 6 kind of disciplines, cosmology, physics, etc., and show how the more we learn in these disciplines, the more we see the fingerprint of an intelligent designer. We have time to just look at 2. So let's start with physics. I want to imagine you come down and join me in San Juan Capistrano, near where I live. Now, if you know San Juan Capistrano, yes, we have a mission, but also there's a bunch of undeveloped land kind of east of the freeway. And we go walking in the hills back in there and we come across this abandoned cabin. And you think, this is strange, I wanna go up and explore this cabin, but you notice something odd. You hear the sound of your favorite song in the background, Beat It by Michael Jackson. You open up the door, walk in, you smell the scent of your most beloved meal. You see the books you like on the counter, shoes that fit you perfectly, a jacket that's just your size. Walk over to the fridge, open it up, it's all the snacks you like to munch on. Walk over to the bathroom, open up the door, and it's all the toiletries that you use. Now, what would you suspect? Besides thinking that somebody was stalking you, you would not say, gosh, what a coincidence. you would know that there are so many things set precisely that someone was expecting your arrival. Friends, in many ways, this cabin is what we've discovered about the universe as a whole in just the past few decades. In fact, Freeman Dyson, a well-acclaimed and accomplished scientist, not a Christian, he put it this way. He said, as we look out into the universe and identify the many accidents of physics and astronomy that have worked to our benefit, it almost seems as if the universe must, in some sense, have known that we were coming. Now, what does he mean? There are certain laws of physics, so to speak, that are constants in our universe. And they all seem to have one strange thing in common. They're set precisely where they need to be to have a universe that's even capable of supporting any kind of complex life. Philosophers call this the fine-tuning of the universe. Kind of like you get in the shower, you take the hot and the cold and you fine-tune it so it's just right. Or if you remember those old radio dials, how you'd have to turn to get the static out and get it just right. There's all these different laws of physics and cosmology in our universe, and they're all set right where they need to be, so to speak. In fact, kind of like Goldilocks, that's too hot, that's too cold, just right. We live in a universe where these laws that govern our existence are just right. In fact, Frederick Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang, he said it almost seems as if someone's been monkeying with physics. And that's why Paul Davies, who's a well-accomplished and brilliant scientist at Arizona State University, again, he's not a Christian. He said, the cliche that life is balanced on a knife edge is a staggering understatement in this case. No knife in the universe could have an edge that fine. So here's the way to understand this that might make it sink home for you. I mentioned that I teach full-time at Biola. We have a graduate program in apologetics. But I went to Biola as an undergrad. And my senior year, a couple friends of mine, if you've ever been on a campus, on the backside of campus, there's these dorms called Thompson and Lee. They're graduate dorms. And my friend who's on the second or the third floor, and what was great about this is they had a window overlooking a large parking lot, tall row of trees, a big water gutter, and then on the other side was a stop sign. So we got the great idea that we would open up his window at night and we would take one of these massive water balloon launchers, launch balloons from the window and try to hit the windshield of cars coming home at night just to give them a pleasant surprise back to campus. And you know what these large water balloon launchers are, right? Like some of you have seen these, they take like 3 people. They're like huge rubber bands. One person holds this side, the other one holds this side, and then there's a pouch, the middle person pulls it back and you put a water balloon, an egg, a cat or something in it and you let it fly. Well, we usually missed. And at one point we saw this little red car driving in. You can kind of see it off to the right coming in from campus. It was like, get the water balloons. We actually had a bucket by the window full of water balloons. That's how devious we were. So we opened up the window. I remember holding one side. My buddy holds the other side. We pull back, my friend pulls back as hard as he can with a water balloon, lets it fly. It goes slinging out the window. It goes across the parking lot. It goes above the row of trees. It clears the water gutter. This car stops and bam, smacks it right on the windshield and shatters it. She has a heart attack. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. That is really messed up. They laughed here. I can't hear all you guys streaming in, but I'm guessing some of you may have as well. That is really messed up. Actually, it didn't shatter. You know how it does like a spider crack? It just like goes up the whole windshield. And needless to say, our water balloon launching days came to an immediate end because we had to pay for it, right? That might have been the best economic lesson I got in college. Well, what's interesting is if you just stop and reflect on this for a moment, how many things had to be just right for us to hit our target? What would have happened if we had more water in the balloon? It wouldn't have gone far enough. What if we would have had less? It would have gone further. What if there was more tension? Or what if he pulled it back a little bit more or at a different angle? Or what if we were in Colorado where the air is lighter and things go further? Can you start to see how many things have to be just right to hit our target? Do you know the universe is like that? Since the beginning of the universe, it's been expanding in every direction. It's as if space itself is stretching. But if the mass of the universe varied by the slightest amount, if it was more, the force wouldn't be strong enough, the universe would crunch on itself. If it was less, it would expand so quickly we wouldn't have stars, planets, and life. So Mark Horton, a NASA scientist, put it this way. He said, if the balance between gravity and the expansion rate were altered by 1 part in 1 million, billion, there would be no galaxies, stars, planets, or life. And in fact, the level of precision for which the mass has to be set in this ratio is equivalent to all the mass in the universe compared to 1 grain of salt. If it varied by that much, our universe would be inhospitable. Now, what's amazing is this is just one example. Scientists have found well over 30 physical or cosmological parameters that must each be fine-tuned for life, each set kind of on the right dial, so to speak. Now, there's actually way more than this, but I like to state a conservative estimate to err on the conservative side. So what are the odds? Here's some of the examples of the kind of forces in nature that each must be fine-tuned, such as the force of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. These are examples of the kind of physical constants that have to be set within a very narrow range. What happens mathematically if we take 2 of these? So let's take, for example, the force of gravity and the cosmological constant. What are the odds that the 2 of these would be set at within the narrow range to even have a universe capable of supporting life? Do you know how big this number becomes? It becomes 1 part in 100 million trillion. Now, that's a big number. If you can't grasp that number, just think of our new national debt. Oh, some of you now, it's sinking home, isn't it? This number is actually equivalent to all the mass in the universe compared to 1 atom. Friends, can you see how saying this happened by chance and there's no design behind this seems to take a lot of faith? Oxford scientist Roger Penrose, he said, if we combined all the laws that must be fine-tuned, we couldn't even write down that number in full, since it would require more zeros than the number of elementary particles in the universe. I don't have enough faith to believe that this could happen by chance or it's a cosmic fluke. It seems to me, when we see things are fine-tuned, that's because there's a fine-tuner, an intelligent mind with a purpose behind it. Well, let's look at a second example. So let's move kind of from the macro level, the world of physics, down into the micro level in biology. Well, I'm guessing some, if not most of you, at some point in your life have taken a biology class. Well, if you've studied biology, you probably remember that biology is the study of living systems. It's the study of life. Well, that's only partially true. Nobel laureate David Baltimore, in a widely cited speech, he said, modern biology is a science of information. It's the science of information. You see, 1953, Watson and Crick discovered DNA. They discovered there was an information basis to DNA, and the function of life is the storage and process and transfer of information. So if you want to explain how life arises from non-life, you have to give an adequate account of where all this information comes from. So what best explains where this information comes from? Well, first off, let's just take a step back and think about how much information is in the human body. So the average adult human body has roughly 100 trillion cells. If you took the DNA out of one cell and uncoiled it, it would be about 9 feet in length. That means all the DNA in your body strung together would go from here to the sun and back about 70 times. I mean, that's amazing to just stop and ponder and think about. Now, what does DNA do? It stores information. That's the purpose. In fact, one conservative estimate said 1 cell in your body, the DNA storage capacity, has the equivalent of 8 billion letters, 500 million words, or 8,000 books. 8,000 books. A more recent study estimated, and all these are kind of sophisticated estimates. Evolution News and Views estimated that the amount of storage capacity in 1 cell in your body is the equivalent of 500,000 DVDs. Wouldn't you like to have a memory stick with 500,000 movies on it? Some of you would still get bored. Even Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, he understood how complex and sophisticated DNA is. He put it this way. He said, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. Now, this raises a very thorny and interesting question. If we look inside the DNA in the human body, we see more sophistication, more complexity, more information and storage than anything humans can create. What possibly is the best explanation for all this information? Well, one common explanation actually reminds me of a clip from one of my favorite comedies. Take a look.
I want to ask you a question straight out, flat out. I want you to give me an honest answer. What do you think the chances are of a guy like you and a girl like me ending up together?
Well, Lloyd, that's difficult to say, and we really don't...
Hit me with it. Just give it to me straight. I came a long way just to see you married. Just, least you can do is level with me. What are my chances?
Not good.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
I love that clip. And the humor's obvious, right? When she says 1 out of 1,000,000, she's effectively saying you don't have a chance. Well, recently, I still teach a high school class, I mentioned it, Capistrano Valley Christian Schools. I went to some of my atheist friends, and I said, can you tell me the best, most compelling atheist book? I'd like to take some high school students through it. Now, some of you might be thinking, that sounds pretty irresponsible. Why would you do that? You know what? I think number one, our young people are capable of a lot more than we tend to give them credit for. And number two, our kids are being exposed to these ideas. I'm not afraid of challenging ideas to the Christian faith. What I'm afraid of is young people who aren't trained and who aren't prepared, who then get thrown to the wolves and don't know how to defend themselves. In fact, that's why this past summer, at partnership with Biola, we started this thing called Summit Ministries, 12 days for students 16 to 23. The best worldview training on the planet. How do you think about the life issue, the marriage issue, the reliability of the Bible, economics and Christianity? If you're that age, you've got to come join me for that couple weeks. Well, I took my students through the book because what happened is my atheist friends, the number one book they told me was Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. It's a 400-page book. So I took 12 high school students through this book. Well, we came to the point where he's giving an explanation for the origin of life. And do you know what his explanation is? Luck, chance. Well, the question is, when you look at the sophistication of DNA, is this an adequate explanation to account for all the information that we see? That's the question. Well, in the book, Understand Intelligent Design, Dr. Dembski and I tracked down this MIT quantum computational physicist, all right? Smart guy whose job is to come up with mathematical models based upon what we know about the universe. And he tried to estimate how much information we could get. Now, why did he do this? Because Richard Dawkins, in trying to explain the origin of life, came up with something he called the monkeys typing Shakespeare theorem. The monkeys typing Shakespeare theorem. And the idea was, as you'll see coming up, if you had enough monkeys and enough computers or enough typewriters, and you gave them enough time, eventually one of these monkeys would sit down and type out all the works of Shakespeare. Do you see what he was trying to explain? He was trying to say, we don't have a mind and intelligence. How do we get information through a blind process? So if you have enough time and enough resources, eventually anything can happen. So Dr. Dembski and I traced down this MIT quantum computational physicist to see if he could mathematically figure out how much information could arise in the universe. It's not unlimited. The universe has a certain age, it has a certain size. We can actually quantify how much information could arise by chance. So could a monkey sit down and type out all the works of Shakespeare? Do you know what Seth Lloyd, this quantum computational physicist, came up with? He said, given all the resources of the universe, it couldn't produce all the works of Shakespeare, couldn't produce one work of Shakespeare, couldn't produce a chapter or a page or a paragraph. All the resources of the universe by itself at best could produce 4 lines from one work of Shakespeare. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer. That's it. So a few years ago, actually, a professor and some students came together and decided to test the monkeys typing Shakespeare theorem. So they put some monkeys in a zoo with a computer, an old computer, to see if one of these monkeys would sit down and start typing out Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. Well, the first monkey climbs up on top of the rock and starts bashing the computer. Another monkey climbs up on top and goes to the bathroom on the computer, hence the cage. But before you laugh at this experiment, what might surprise you is in the few weeks that they were in there, these monkeys typed out between 6 and 7 pages of written text. Seriously, these monkeys produced between 6 and 7 pages of written text. A string of A's, L's, M's, an occasional J, and a few S's. Not a single word. Now, in case you don't have enough reading material on your shelf, you can actually purchase the literary works of these monkeys. They've been put into a volume called Notes Towards the Complete Works of Shakespeare. You can actually buy that online. I'm guessing you're laughing at some of these attempts to explain because you know something that's obvious. In fact, if you come to visit me, say we go walking on the beach in Capo Beach, near where I live, and you come across these etchings in the sand that say, written in a heart, John loves Mary. Now, none of you would stop and say, gosh, I didn't know in beaches in South OC that when the tides went in and came back, they would leave messages from the depths of the ocean. None of you explain this by wind or erosion or the tides or earthquakes. You know there's only one possible explanation for these etchings, that a person wrote it, a mind. In fact, you might think, oh, John does love Mary. Or you might see it and go, oh, Mary wants to be loved by John. But you'd know the only plausible explanation is that there's an intelligent mind that wrote it. Stephen Myers, a Cambridge-trained philosopher of science, in his book, Signature in the Cell, he said, whenever we find specified information and we know the causal story of how that information arose, we always find that it arose from an intelligent source. And he's right. Look, if you have a shirt with writing on it, you trace it back to a designer. If you have a book, you trace it back to an author. A magazine, trace it back to a journalist. If you get a text and it's legible, you trace it back to a texter. If you go outside and you look up in the clouds that says drink Coke, and I asked one of you, what caused that? None of you would say, yep, that means the storm is coming here from the east. You wouldn't say that. You'd know if the information drink Coke was there, a pilot or a mind went through and wrote that. Well, when we look inside the DNA, we don't see the equivalent of John loves Mary or drink Coke. We see more information that's more sophisticated than anything humans can come close to creating. Like the fine tuning of the universe points towards a fine tuner, the information in DNA points towards an author of life. In fact, one of the most influential atheists over the past half century, his name is Antony Flew. He died in 2010, spent 5 decades writing against the existence of God. 3 years before he died, he wrote a book. You know what the title was? There Is a God. Why the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. You know what he said? Amongst other things, specifically, he said this: what I think the DNA material has done is show that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. The enormous complexity by which the results were achieved looks to me like the work of intelligence. And I think he's exactly right. Friends, the skies proclaim the glory of God. Even down to the DNA, we see written in the universal code information pointing towards an author of life. So why does this matter? Why bother to look at these big questions for a few weeks in your church? Well, let me give you 2 important principles that I think stem from this. Number 1, if people are truly made in the image of God, then as Christians, we must treat everyone with dignity. Nobody is a mistake. Nobody is an accident. That's why historically Christians have cared for widows, made hospitals, cared for orphans, defended the unborn, and was against sexism and against racism, because every single human being from conception until the moment we die has infinite dignity and worth because he or she is made in the image of God. In 1996, I was just after my freshman year at Biola in college. And I was working in Centennial Park selling t-shirts at the Olympics, the 96 Olympics. And there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people there, and people would wear flags of what country they're from because they're proud of it. I saw this man walking up to me, and I was working a t-shirt stand. I had like a minute or two. He had a huge rainbow flag blazing across his sweatshirt. I couldn't think of any better way to get in a conversation, so I just said, oh, that's an interesting flag. What country are you from? That's just what came to my mind. This is 2 decades ago. He looked at me, said exactly these words. He said, oh, it's a queer thing. I said, oh, so you wear this so people know that you're gay, is that right? He said, yes. I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? I said, because you wear this so blatantly for people to see, do some people make insults and rude comments and treat you in a negative way because of this? He said, you know what? It actually happens all the time. This man was probably 45 or 50 years old. I just looked him in the eyes and I said, sir, I am so sorry that people treat you like that. That's not right. Have you ever been looking at someone's eyes and it felt like you could see their soul? It felt like this sadness and this pain. And he looked at me, paused, he said, thank you. You're the nicest person I've met at the Olympics. He said, do you mind if I take a picture with you? I said, sure. You know why? Maybe someday he'd put it on his fridge and someone would see it and say, do you know who that is? That guy's a Christian. That guy's a Christian. Now, I only had a minute and a half to talk to this guy. What essentially was I saying? I was saying, you are made in the image of God. And everybody on this planet, no matter where they're from, no matter their race, no matter their gender, no matter their socioeconomic status, is made in the image of God and deserves dignity and respect as a human being. Second, if we've been made by God, just as a computer has a purpose, you were designed to be in relationship with God and with other people. That's our purpose. That's ultimately why we are here, to love God and to love other people. A few years ago, Time magazine had a cover story called The Science of Happiness. And they went in there and they said, here's all the things that the culture we live in says brings happiness, but really makes no statistical difference, such as being young, making a lot of money, having a good education. They went through all these things. They said, yeah, that makes sense. They get to the end, they said, 2 things we found associated with the biggest sense of happiness. And happiness doesn't mean you just feel good about yourself, but a deeper sense of contentment, meaning, and joy about life. And they finally get to the end, they say these 2 things are what bring the most meaning to life for people. I read it and I chuckled out loud. I chuckled out loud. You know why? They said 2 things. Number 1, a relationship with God and a relationship with other people. Why did I chuckle? Because 2,000 years ago, Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment in the law? What did he say? He said, love God and love other people. I love it when science catches up with the Bible. Friends, you are not a mistake. You're not an accident. This is not a purposeless world in which we just define truth as we go along. There's a God who has made us and who's made himself known in other ways. But one way is in the depths of the universe, Psalms 19:2 tells us, 19:1 and 2. But also it's as if God has autographed every cell in your body. I hope you know and believe in the depth of your heart that you're not an accident, that you're not a mistake. I pray you treat all human beings with the dignity and respect that they deserve as bearers of the image of God. And also that you know deeply that it's only in relationship with God, when we love God and we love other people, that we're truly set free. Amen. Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you. Thank you for this church, their willingness to tackle the big questions, unapologetically, to speak truth. I pray as this church has just such an influence worldwide, that you put your protecting arms around it. And God, I also pray for each individual here, if there's people that have just not really sensed your love, not really sensed that you deeply care about them and that they're not a mistake and you have made them and you have a plan for their lives, that you will just give them the comfort and the guidance that we know that only you can give. God, bless this church and bless the rest of this series as we go deeper to explore these tough questions that we know we can ultimately find answers in you. And we pray this in your name. Amen.